Evie. Thanks to Evie for being our behind the scenes. There she is. We can wave and thank Evie in advance for all the behind the scenes tech magic she'll do for us this morning, including making beautiful sound happen. So thank you. Good Shabbos, everyone. If you're still like me, you're still a little bit waking up, a little bit putting on your Shabbos face, having some Shabbos coffee. But nonetheless, this morning we're going to jump into some Torah learning that is a bit intense. So nothing to wake us up like some good Torah about bodies and what our bodies do and what our bodies produce and what our bodies leak and ooze. It's all going to happen this morning. Great. How's that, Evie? How's my sound now? Just give me a thumbs up. Great. Okay. Everyone can hear me? Good. Before we jump into the learning, just a few tricks of the trade here. You're all able to unmute yourself. So just so you know that you have that power when you're called on to speak. And I'll ask just because it's easiest for me as a Zoom teacher, as a Zoom moderator to know who wants to talk by the Zoom hand. Pretty soon, please God, we'll be able to raise our real hands. But for now, if you can just raise your Zoom hand if you want to speak, which you can do by clicking the little reactions button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking the raise hand feature, like Lori is doing now. Thanks for demonstrating for us, Lori. So when we're opening up for discussion, you'll be able to do that. And that's how we'll hopefully be able to have as nice a flow of conversation as possible. Just another tachlis, another just point of tech here this morning, right? There's two links that were here in the open book link. And just so you guys know, everyone knows that at 10 o'clock, right when services start, there's an adult B mitzvah happening this morning. So mazal tov to everyone who's undergoing that ceremony this morning, that simcha, that joy is a separate link. So we're gonna try and end around 9:50 so that everyone has the 9:50, 9:55, so everyone has the chance to hop over to the other link, and so that I actually have the chance to hop over to the Romemu Center so that I can be in person for the first time leading with Chazan Basia, which is really exciting for us to be able to sing together in person. So with all of that said, since we're ending a little bit early, Evie will share that link in the chat when we get there towards the end so that everyone knows where to go when we are finished learning, but let's learn. To start us off, right, our bracha for Torah learning this morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, Holy Blessed One, for soaking us in Torah, for that gift, for that mitzvah, that commandment to learn Torah, even when it's hard, even when it is messy, which it will be this morning. So our parsha this week is a double parsha, Tazria Metzora. We're reading and learning and thinking about, like I said, bodies. And it's really the Torah trying to deal with what it means to have a body. What does it mean to have a body that produces life, or the potential to produce life, right? What does it mean to have a body that loves? What does it mean to have a body that has sex, and that all what comes with all the things that happens when one has sex? What does it mean to have a body that gets ill, that has the potential for skin ailments, that has the ability to transmit invisible, transmissible diseases, right? It's actually very relevant Torah. A lot of this Torah is very relevant to us right now in what we're moving through together. We're not going to focus on all of that skin ailment Torah this morning, but we are going to talk about bodies and what does it mean to have a body. So to start us off, we're going to learn the first chunk of the Parsha, which deals specifically with a person who gives birth and what happens to that person after she gives birth, and what are all of the precautions that she should be taking, right? And all of this is to deal with. It's not just what does it mean to have a body, but what does it mean to have a body that participates in religion? And for our ancestors to participate in religion meant to be able to move in and out of the space that we call the Mishkan, the space that we call God's holy dwelling place. And what does it mean for one to be able to do that? Can one do that? What does it look like after we do something that's very bodily? Can we, and what do we need to do in order to be able to come back into the religious cult of Israel? Right? It's quite different than how we live our lives today in terms of our religious cult and how we interact with God's holy dwelling place, not just because God's holy dwelling place is anywhere we want it to be today, but but the rituals that we do in order to make that happen. So we're going to start off with the beginning of the Parsha, the beginning of Parshat Tazria, which deals with childbirth. I'm going to be sharing my screen in a moment, and yes, I'm going to do that. Great. So we're in Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 12, and this is again the very beginning of our parsha. And maybe I'll ask Asher Chaim if you could read for us the psukim in Hebrew, and to start us off.
How far?
Go ahead and read all 8 verses for us. Maybe I might interrupt you, so just be ready for that, like I just did. Yeah.
וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, אישה כי תזריע וילדה זכר, וקמעה 7 ימים, כי מי נידת דבותך תטמע.
Great. So, ki tazria, that's the name of our parsha. We're going to talk about that word. What does it mean? That's just so we're focusing on that word, and other light words, other words to focus on, Tazria. And pay attention to the word tuma and tahara, and all the variants of those concepts, which we'll talk about in a moment. Go ahead, Asher.
וביום השמיני ימול בשר עורלתו, ו30 יום ו3 ימים תשב בדמי טהרה, בכל חודש לא תיגע, ואל המקדש לא תבוא עד מלאת ימי טהרה. ואם נקבה תלד, וקמעה 7 כנדתך, ו60 יום ו6 ימים תשב על דמי טהרה. ובמלאת ימי טהרה, לבן או לבת, תביא כבש בן שנה לעולה, ובן יונה או קור לחטאת, אל פתח אוהל מועד אל הכהן. ויקריבו לפני אדוני וכפר עליה וטהרה ממקור דמה. זאת תורת היולדת לזכר או לנקבה. ואם לא תמצא ידך דייסה ולקחה 2 תורים או 2 בני יונה, אחד לעולה ואחד לחטאת, וכפר עליה הכהן וטהרה.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Asher Chaim, for that beautiful reading. Can I get a volunteer just to do the English, to read the English for us?
I would.
Great,
happy
Lori.
to.
Thank you. And Lori, the same rules apply. I might interrupt you, and I very likely will. So go ahead.
Sure. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people thus: when a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be tameh 7 days. She shall be tameh as at the time of her menstrual period.
Great. So for all of those who were hoping that I was going to translate tameh, I'm not going to. So we're going to talk about it, but not translating it for now. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood transition for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, not enter the sanctuary until her period of transition is completed.
Great. And just to point out that period of transition, that's my translation. The original Hebrew that Asher Chaim read was Demei Tahora. So the bloods of Tahora, which I'm also not going to translate, except for I did, period of transition. It's not a great translation. It's fine. But just to note that, right, the original Hebrew, Demei Tahora, Tahora bloods. Keep going, Marty.
If she bears a female, she shall be tameh 2 weeks during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of a blood transition for 66 days. On the completion of her period of transition, for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He shall offer it before Hashem and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be ritually fit from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child, male or female. If, however, her means do not suffice for a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The priest shall make expiation on her behalf, and she shall be clean.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lori. Hang on, I'm gonna make it so that you can see just the. Is that better? Did I do something that's good or bad?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe zoom in a little bit.
Zoom in. Okay. Thanks, Evie.
Yeah.
So great. Everyone can see beautiful Torah on their screens. Okay, awesome. Okay, so a lot happening in just 8 verses, like really a lot. Yeah, Asher Chaim, question, comment?
I really appreciate the words that you're leaving untranslated. And I'm thinking you might even add chatat to that list.
Oh, you know exactly where we're going, Asher Chaim. I think I did translate it, but I shouldn't have. So for the purposes of this shir, I definitely shouldn't have. So right, so great. So the things that there's a lot happening in these 8 verses. The things that we are going to focus on moving forward. What's tuma? What's tahara? And what is a chatat? And why are we doing it? Great. So thank you for pointing that out. Does someone want to just summarize like the massive amount of junk that's going on in these 8 verses? See if we can get someone whose voice we haven't heard yet.
Hi, this is Tony.
Tony, go for it.
This is not a full summary, but what strikes me is blood and turtle doves as a starting point anyway.
What about the blood and turtle doves?
Well, that's beyond my pay grade, frankly.
Okay.
Sorry.
You know, it might be beyond mine as well. But okay, so blood and turtle doves. Great. So there's a lot of blood. A lot of different kinds of blood, right? Great. We've got some hands. Bob, go ahead.
So there are 2 separate periods, a shorter of tameh and a longer of transition. The extent of those periods varies based on the gender of the baby.
Great. I'll alter you slightly based on the sex of the baby, right? Go ahead.
The baby, there is a process of bringing a sacrifice to the Kohen at the end, after which she's back in her normal state. And there's some accommodation if she has financial constraints, so she can't bring a sheep. But why is she bringing one thing that relates to sin and another thing that is just the burnt offering? So it's pretty intricate.
Great. That was an awesome summary. Thank you, Bob. Lauren, do you have something to add?
I do. Thank you. Sorry, technical difficulties there.
All good.
Thank you, Bob, for that. You know, it's so interesting. I haven't really zoomed in on this passage for years, I realize. And I loved everything, Rabbi Maya. I have loved everything you said up until you called it junk, you know, all this junk.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Because I read it now, you know, I remember probably reading this before I had the privilege of giving birth to 3 children. And I remember, you know, back, say in my 20s when I read this, I got really fixated on, you know, Bob, actually the things that you pointed out on the gender or the differences between how boys are treated and versus girls. And I probably got very angry that for 66 days, a woman had to wait after giving birth to a girl. And I probably got very angry about that, wanting to know why is it only 7 days for a boy? And I also got really focused on the sin offerings, the difference between the sin offerings or the burnt offering and the sin offering. Whereas now that I'm on the other side of childbirth, I look at this and I say, oh my, this is what nobody tells you. This is what protects a woman after giving birth when she's in her liminal state.
Beautiful.
Because there is so much blood, not
Yes.
just during birth, but in the weeks after giving birth.
Yes.
That one is resigned to wearing diapers. I mean, it's crazy. And this is not something that women talk about. It wasn't in the memo I got from my mom or from my gynecologist.
Yeah.
And the reason why is people say, oh, you know, if we told you, you wouldn't want to do it. And here it all is, these beautiful instructions.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. Fully apologize for using the word junk. That was a very poor word choice on my part. And I was absolutely not referring to the content more. It was a poor choice of slang, and I apologize. And you're absolutely right that it's not that. And it is Torah, and I should never talk about Torah that way. So I will bring a chatat for saying that, but you're absolutely right. All of these psukim are right, bringing light to something that is not talked about enough. I have not given birth, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about lots of different kinds of bloods, and I've spent a lot of time with this psukim, and so I'm right there with you as much as I can be without being a person that's given birth, and want to thank you for bringing all of that to light, because absolutely we should include it in the memo. And we're going to talk about the opportunity that's being presented in the psukim. Wow, we're only 8 psukim in and we have so many hands. This is beautiful. Okay, so Margot, and then Jay, and then Tony. I think, Beth, I might have seen your hand go like this without a raised hand. You'll correct me if I'm wrong once we get there. So Margot, Jay, Tony for now. Go ahead, Margot.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos.
So I think that in the process of giving birth, life and death come into too close an encounter.
Yes.
And this encounter blurs the boundaries of creation. So we have a new life, God willing, but there's no guarantee. And the life of the mother is threatened also. And this is a state of religious limbo almost, where we don't know if it's going to be life or it's going to be death.
Yeah.
And that, you know, a certain isolation is important to bond with the baby to be grateful for your life when you know that when it's pretty sure you're going to have it, and maybe when you're sure the baby's going to be born in it. I guess that's all I wanted to say.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Everything that's being brought out is exactly where I want to go. And that's the flavor of this cheer is certainly there. So thank you, Margot. I think I said Jay.
Shabbat Shalom. I guess continuing on Lauren and Margot, it occurs to me, especially on this liminal state, that in modern times when, especially in Western medicine, there's somewhat less of a threat to the life of the mother, whether or not this appreciation of these liminal states also might be connected to what we often call postpartum depression and other life-changing implications of that act, and to Lauren's point of trying to protect the mother in that very vulnerable position.
Yeah, thank you. There's so much, right? There's so much. This is really dealing with the after, and as Lauren said, right? We don't talk about the after necessarily, and there's like, in terms of pregnancy, right? There's like a lot of visibility of like you're pregnant, and then right, as someone who I haven't given birth, but I have dear friends who've given birth, and sisters-in-law, and right, you see the pregnancy, and then it's like you were pregnant, oh, and now there's a baby, and like that incredible miracle that happens, and there's like a lot there's a lot of after that that the world doesn't see if you're not the person who's giving birth. The only thing I'll add, Jay, to what you said is and to Margot, right, drawing out this like intense life and death thing. Thank God we're living in a time where there's modern medicine and entire populations of women who are really at risk for death and childbirth, especially women of color. So just to point out that that's actually still, that liminal space of like could be life or death is still very incredibly too real for too many women. Which again, we're gonna keep talking about this luscious, intense Torah. Evie, is there something wrong? We're good?
No, it's all good.
Okay, good.
Tony.
Sorry?
Tony, I think is
Tony,
Yeah.
great. Thanks, Evie, for your help. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
So rich. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, one and all. And I'm just, as I often get to by now in our open book, I'm all but overwhelmed by the richness of it all and the gathering community of it all. It's so beautiful. I'll try to be brief and say that there's a connection for me anyway, in my feverish head and heart, between the tent of meeting and the liminal state of life and death and childbirth. And it's through the tent of meeting that we can not only bear, but enjoy, not only endure, but enjoy liminal states that otherwise, when we're all on our own, it's just way too lonely and alone. Even though we have to go through that at times, it's such a blessing, a set of blessings, a fountain of blessings that we can share liminal states together.
Beautiful. I love that, Tony.
And I will only add briefly, as a topic sense, really, when Moses says, I set before you life and death, choose life. I just think he's saying, be like our Creator and choose to see it as good, because in the liminal state, when you are completely faced with the great mystery of life and death, you're not necessarily, you're gonna be, everything in you is going to be triggered towards fight or flight or freeze. And so in that moment, don't let the hound of heaven, don't just go heading for the hills or backing against a wall and fighting to the death or freezing. In that moment, accept life as good, choose to see life as good, to choose to see this whole thing as good.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Wow. I see a lot
I'm
of
gonna follow Tony.
Sorry, Lori, 1 second. Sorry. I see a lot of hands, and we have many texts to get through, and I'm just like Tony's overwhelmed. I'm also overwhelmed. So there were 3 hands that I saw before Tony started talking. There's now 6 hands raised. So I'm gonna take the 3 that I saw, and then we're gonna there's more text that I want to bring. What's lovely about what's happening is that you guys are all bringing in the Torah, and all I'm going to do is just going to bring texts that confirm everything that you are already bringing, which is great. But I do want to make sure that we get some even more richness to enhance these 8 rich psukim already. So the hands that I saw before Tony started speaking were it was Beth and Lori and Amy. So I'm gonna ask Beth to speak, and then Lori, and then Amy, and then I see that there are other hands, and I hope that what you have to share now will remain relevant when we come back around to discussion, and I'm sure it will, and I hope to hear it. Beth, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm struck when we're looking at the gender difference between how the woman stays in this liminal state after giving birth to a daughter rather than a son. When she's given birth to a daughter, she's created another person who can give birth. And so the ability to create life and to be in this state between life, death, and breath has been exponentially increased. I mean, not that the male child doesn't contribute, but there's another incubator. And I think that compounding of incubation is possibly what leads to the longer period of time for the woman with her daughter.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah. And I want to make sure also that we're just right. I definitely I have a dear friend and colleague who talks about, right, that as being the reason, right, when a female body creates another female body, right, there's creation of another incubator. I also want to make sure we're being expansive about not gender essentializing, right, and not all women have uteruses, and not all uteruses belong to women, and not, right, some women bleed and some women don't bleed, and right, I just want to be very careful about our language and know that the Torah is really thinking about male and female sexes, and thank God today in 2021 we have a much more expansive idea of what gender is, and so I just want to name that for anyone in the room who's feeling itchy about whatever essentializing is happening in the Torah. Thank God we know a lot more about the expansiveness and possibility for gender, not discounting the very real biological facts of what it means to be a female sex body and a male sex body. Dibarti. Lori.
Yes, thank you, Maya, and thank you everyone who spoke. I want to acknowledge our brother who talked about postpartum depression and that space of the respect for that. And I want to acknowledge Tony's comment about the liminal state and the tent of meeting. My mother did have postpartum depression in 1961. And in 1961, it was diagnosed as paranoid and schizophrenic. And so my mother was hospitalized and given shock therapy for 3 years while I was 8 years old. So I want to bring up the tent of meeting, because I know Rabbi David brought in the whole child thing, but having been a child with a mother who had postpartum depression, I was parentified and I had no childhood. I turned into my mother's mother and my father's wife. And so the tent of meeting for me, when I meet Tony on Fridays, we talk a lot. He's a psychiatrist and I'm a trauma expert. And we talk about shame and stigma, that there was no room from us to talk about my mother's postpartum depression in 61. She was paranoid and schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. And there was no room in the synagogue because she was mentally ill. And so the shame and stigma that comes from not having the tent of meeting, that is happening now.
Beautiful.
Because it's the shame and stigma we can come out of by having these conversations, and then we can come back to God, because it's really God's grace that we don't live in isolation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lori. Thanks for sharing that story with us. And yeah, hopefully we'll come back around to this idea, this beautiful idea of the tent of meeting and what the tent of meeting can do for us. Yeah, Amy, and then we're gonna keep moving. Yeah.
I'll be very brief. Excuse me. People are addressing the elephant in the room, one looking at a leg and one at a tail. But one appendage of the elephant is the fact that I talked with a midwife and asked her this question: why are girls, you have to wait longer? And she said that when a baby girl is born, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, rarely, blood will emanate as if a period, or menses blood. And that is why they wait the extra period. But I think Beth got the other issue correctly too.
Right. Well, I think, and obviously those two are connected, right? Meaning if you give birth to a female sex child and that child has a vagina and the ability to menstruate and is menstruating, right? That also points to the potential future ability to give birth. So I think those two answers are very much connected. Great. So, wow. So we got all of that from these 8 psukim, which is no shock because they're really rich and really layered. So I want to try and focus us in a little bit for the next bit. And we're going to touch on all of those juicy ideas that everybody brought. Again, like I said, you're all bringing the Torah that I wanted to bring this morning. So thank God for the tent of meeting. So Tuma and Tahara. So, right, the main question I wanted to ask, which I'll try and answer myself, given all of the expansiveness we just heard, right? So as Asher Chaim pointed out to us way back at the beginning, that I didn't translate, right? I did not translate Tuma and I didn't translate Tahara. And as he pointed out, he would also add to that list that I shouldn't have translated Chatat. Right, Tuma and Tahara, these big words with big associations, many of us might have twitchy associations with them. A lot of that actually has to do with what we're going to find later in our parsha. For me, anyway, as a person who menstruates, as a woman, there's a lot that has to do with Tuma and Tahara that I find itchy, having to do with nida, right? Having to do with menstruation. And all that being said, there's a lot of misconceptions about Tuma and Tahara because they're often mistranslated, in my opinion, as pure and impure, which is not really what the text is saying. But really, it's about this relationship, like you're all pointing to, this relationship between the body and the tent of meeting, right? Tuma and Tahara are not about being pure or impure, but it's actually about what it means to be fit or unfit, to be able to go back into the tent of meeting, to be able to participate in active religious cult. So based on this text alone, right, Tuma and Tahara are really about exactly what was brought, right? It's about that period of transition, right? It's about the ability to wait before jumping back into things because you're bleeding for weeks and weeks after you give birth to a child. And right, maybe I don't want to host a whole smorgasbord with bagels and lox right after I have a baby, 8 days later. Right, that's actually, and then that's here too, right? Is that the circumcision is here as well, right? But the ability to also say, I'm actually in a transitional moment, right? That's, to me, what's being brought out in these psukim about Tuma and Tahara. It's really about a transitional period. Now, I want to bring us back to one of the original words, right? That the ikar, really, the essence of this parsha, which is the name of the parsha, right? Ki tazria, right? Isha ki tazria. So a woman that is in childbirth. That's how we're translating tazria. I want to bring a comment by Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, medieval commentator, who is bringing us, right? He brings us an idea of what tazria actually, what tazria might mean, other than giving birth. What does it point to? Right. So he says, when and I'm going to say that he's using a lot of technical terms here and really objectifying women in a way that is itchy to me, but he points something out that's going to be helpful for us. So when a woman has matured a human germ, very scientific here, right? That's how he's translating Isha ki tazriya. When a woman has matured a human germ, we're now in science class. Germ, basically the seed of plants, right? Okay, and hence herb yielding seed, which he references Genesis 1:11. We're going to look at that in a second. The seed forming activity of plants for the continuation of their species, when applied to human beings, is the usual term for the offspring by which humanity continues their generation. By the use of the expression tazriya here, which only occurs elsewhere in Breshit 1:11 and Breshit 1:12, referring to the activity of plants for the continuation of their species, the mother's role in producing progeny is looked at in the purely material, physical character of its physiological process. Again, science class. And with that one word, the whole idea of the tuma spoken of here is shown. Oh, the entirety of tuma is made clear to him by this very scientific thing. Okay, I'm going to read that again because there's a lot of technical terms we have to get through. Okay, when a woman has matured a human germ, basically the seed of plants and hence herb yielding seed, the seed forming activity of plants for the continuation of their species. Okay, all of that scientific terminology that's used to think about plants, when it's applied to human beings, is the usual term for the offspring by which humanity continues generation. So by the use of the expression tazriya here, which only occurs elsewhere in the beginning of Breshit, when God creates herbage, referring to the, right, when, by the use of the expression tazriya here, which only occurs there, when it's referring to the activity of plants for the continuation of their species. So here, the mother's role in producing progeny is looked at purely material, physical character of the physiological process. And so we can understand tuma because of that. Okay, what does that mean? I'm gonna stop share for a second. So to me, right, what he's bringing out here is this connection between the use of the word tazriya here and the use of tazriya back in Breshit, which we're gonna look at in a second. He's pointing to, right, the specificity of the idea of seed and the idea of seeds that are bearing their own seeds, right? Which brings us to what Beth said, right? When we produce beings, not just female beings, but right, of course, male beings, which play a role in propagating humanity. It's a small, no, I'm just kidding, right? We need Ima seeds and Abba seeds in order to create human life. So, right, but both of those beings, right, have within them the ability to reproduce themselves. So, okay, let's look at Breshit for a second. Great. So, Vayomer Elokim, Tadshe haaretz deshe, Eshev mazriya zera, eitz peri oseh, peri lamino, asher zaro bo, al haaretz vayichen. V'totzeh haaretz deshe, Eshev mazriya zera, laminehu, ve'etz oseh peri, asher zaro bo, laminehu, vayar Elokim kito. God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruits, trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. So the he feel form, which is the specific grammatical form of mazriya, tazriya, right, is only used thrice in the Torah. Tazriya, ki isha ki tazriya, and here by Breshit, when we're talking about seed-bearing plants that produce seed of their own kind. So what Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is trying to do is trying to make meaning of that, because that feels significant, right? That we're only getting that form of the verb in Breshit when we're talking about plants, and here in Tazriya Matzorim, we're talking about human beings. Now, intense connection being made there for a very specific reason, which is that we have the ability, just like plants, to produce offspring that will themselves reproduce. But there's a major difference between Earth and humanity, right? I mean, there's at least one, which is that we're human beings and the Earth is Earth. But within that difference, right, there's a lot of differences. So are people kind of with me? I know that was like science class. Okay, great. So I really appreciate Hirsch's connection that's being made here, because I think it points to this idea of possibility. And if we go down that route, right, it's the idea of possibility that Margot brought out. Intense possibility for either life or death, right? Tazria, that word, the fact of the matter is it's only here and it's only in Breshit. And we're talking about seeds, right? And seeds are potential. And there's potential for life and there's potential for death. But I think that there's a major difference that we need to think about, which Tikva Freimer-Kensky, who's a feminist biblical scholar, is going to hopefully alight a little bit for us. She's one of my favorite biblical scholars. Can I have a volunteer to read Tikva Freimer-Kensky? Great. Yes, go for it. Unmute. So this is right from the book. It's called In the Wake of the Goddesses. Right. She talks about Israelite religion and how it's connected to and differentiated from other ancient Near East religions that focus on God and goddess worship. But here she's going to talk about how we interact with God vis-a-vis the earth and the land.
There never was a time. Can you hear me?
Yes, David, thank you.
There never was a time that the earth was barren. Furthermore, the vegetation that God creates on this third day is self-propagating, each bearing seed after its own kind. The earth is made fertile in such a way as to ensure that it will remain so. There is no need for humans to focus concern on the continuation of this fertility. Just as people do not have to think about helping the sun to rise, because God created it to rise and set, so too they have to think about the earth. This is the way it's getting. Human beings do not have to worry about perpetuating and continuing. I got in front of me here. And continuing any of the elements that God creates. As master of creation, God has the power to keep creation going. God's mastery over the physical universe, epitomized in the creative word, is so powerful that we can assume that this universe will continue without our active efforts towards this end.
Thanks, David. Right, so what she's saying here, which unfortunately I think is not necessarily true in light of climate change and our responsibility to make sure that the earth keeps propagating. But what she's saying, right, lechatchila, right, pre-facto, that the idea should be that, and the idea is, right, that the earth does what it does. I mean, even with climate change, right, if we take into account climate change, the earth is going to do what it's going to do. The sun is going to rise and set. Trees are going to hopefully grow. It's springtime. I don't know about you, but this year in particular, I'm like really appreciating in a new way. Just my awareness of like the green coming back is really, really heightened because of being inside for so long and just walking around and just marveling like, oh my God, like it just happens. Like the world has gone through so much in the last year. And like literally I'm looking outside my window at a tree that's been empty for months and there's little green buds and like, it just happens and I don't have to do anything, right? That just happens. Thank God for rain. Thank God for the earth just doing what it does. And the difference, right, of course, in terms of humanity, as we're going to see in Breshit, in the book of Breshit, right, she's talking about creation, Genesis 1:11, Genesis 1:12, the earth sprouted forth trees of its own kind, and they just propagated. The difference is that when God creates human beings, the same language is not used. It's not mazria there. When God creates human beings, it's pru or vu. God says to humanity, you have to do this. It's a verb. It's a command. You have to be pru urvu. And on top of that, the entire book of Breshit is about families that struggle with infertility. Being able to produce children as human beings is not a given. Even in 2021, my sister and sister-in-law have gone through an insanely painful fertility journey. And I've watched from close up, right? It is not inevitable that human beings are able to produce children. And so while I appreciate Hirsch's connection that he's making, right, between Mazria and Tazria, I think there's a reason that it doesn't come until Vaikra, when we're talking about when and how I can re-enter the religious cult, right? First, we have to learn and see that it's actually not inevitable. Unlike the earth, human beings are much more fragile. And there's a lot more potential for destruction, even though there's a lot of potential for an amazing, amazing life. So to bring us finally to this idea of chatat, right? So all of that being said, right? Why do we have to bring a chatat? Right? And the chatat is exactly that. What that beautiful Torah that everybody brought, right? The chatat is that ritual of transition to mark and acknowledge, I just went through something insanely filled with potential for life, potential for death, whether it was for me or for the child, right? There's multiple layers of potential for life and death that happen here. And unlike the earth on which I live, that is itself Mazria Zera, I am not Mazria Zera in the same way that the earth is. I am Tazria, right? But I had to do that work of Pru Urvu. And so because I had to do that work, and even though I have the ability to produce seed-bearing fruits of their own kind, I first had to go through an intense encounter, right? Up until looking in the face of intense life and death. And to acknowledge that, I have to do a ritual. Now, living as 21st century Jews as we are, we might not be comfy with the ritual of bringing pigeons and turtle doves or a goat. And like, there's an entire other shiur, right, that we could do about why and what and how. That's not this, right? But the idea that I want to bring is the ikar, the essential piece here, is that it's a ritual. It's a ritual for transition that acknowledges the intense precariousness of what it means to be human, what it means to have a body. I'm gonna open it up for a couple of comments. Sue Ann and then Beth.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. And I'll ask people just to, it's 9:50. I want to try and end in 5 minutes. So just to be as brief as possible. Thanks, Sue Ann.
Sure. So I would just add to the physicality on a spiritual level. I think the life and death occur simultaneously in that there is a death that occurs with the mother giving birth on a spiritual level, because you are born into something that is a different rung on the ladder, so to speak. And I've never experienced the moments like the experience that I had when my babies were like brought to me and so I just want to bring that possibility of the spiritual death and birth simultaneously to the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. Kathleen.
Hi.
Hi, Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. This is my son's portion or his anniversary. So I hemorrhaged at the home birth of my boy. So I had a really interesting experience as a result. So what I'd like to say is that for some of my friends, the birthing process was an orgasmic experience. I'm not sure if anybody mentioned that because I was late, but I wanted to share that there's a whole other level that can happen at birth. It didn't happen at my son's, but and And I wonder how much of that is cultural overlay that we've had since you will give birth and pain and all of the cultural fears that are now embedded in all of us. The other thing I wanted to mention is that in some cultures, Tibetan and I think some Latin American cultures and probably others that I've know nothing about, that the woman, the family is kept isolated, but it's not an isolation. It's more like the community cares for the family, but the family doesn't have to do anything. They're kept in an enclosed, protective place during that rocky, that transitional moment from being in connection with the divine, the soul is coming in, all of those things, that liminal moment. But it gives the mother, the child, the father, the ability to become a family and bond, and they don't have to worry about everything else. I had some more things to say, but I think that's probably important. Oh, yeah. And you know what else? One last thing. I would love, I never did that ritual. I think that would be awesome. My son is 23 now, but it was such a traumatic experience for him, for me. I think it would be profound and it would have some closure.
Yeah. So I think, right, Rich, it's just ritual is super important. I don't know if you're saying that you want to bring animal sacrifice, but some kind of ritual to mark. And I think birth rituals, naming rituals, covenantal rituals for babies, right, can serve as that transitional ritual as well. And just to add one thing to what you were saying, just in terms of the orgasmic experience, I'll just share that in this parsha, right, it's lots of things are happening. Another act, right, that we bring a ritual for is sexual acts, right? The bodily fluids that are produced through having sex. So it's all connected, right? This parsha is really about what it means to have a body and what it means to have the ability to produce life, death, and all kinds of things. So David and then Jill, I'd love to hear from you before we close out.
Yeah, I just want to comment on, I love the resonances of the seed, when you go back to Bereshit and here you are in the garden, and of course Eve is with child, with pain, childbirth. Resonances going back there is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, thanks, David. You cut out a little bit, but I think I heard you say the resonance with Bereshit, especially given, right, that's when Chava receives the commandment that she's going to give birth in pain. I think that's what I heard you say, just the resonance there. Jill.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps this parsha could also invoke empathy for people who wanted to have children and couldn't. And so all of this talk about it and about women's role in having children and all of that kind of stuff, maybe a lesson in not taking that for granted, and how we as a community can support everybody, even those who love children, who children love them and weren't able to. So
thank you so much, Jill. Yeah, absolutely. Before we close out, I know there were other folks who wanted to speak, but I really appreciate hearing everyone's Torah this morning. It was so beautiful, and to bring such richness to a parsha that is often difficult. So I want to share, if you were present at Kabbalah Shvat last night, you heard it, but I'll read it myself this morning, a poem that I wrote for this parsha. I've been writing a poem and making a piece of art every week since Bereshit this year, which has been a really amazing experience. So I'll share this poem and then a bracha before we close out and head to our main service. When you bleed, know that it is your body being a body. Holy flowing, living waters, keeping time, like your beating hearts, like the light from the sun, splitting blue from white on the fringes of horizon. When you join body with body, know that God takes pleasure in bodily delights. Holy flowing, living waters, creating contraction like your beating heart, like the light from the moon cutting clear through your window from inky black summer sky. When you have a body, you will leak and you will love, you will hurt and you will heal. Whether by counting days and nightfalls, or by offering something precious as a bargain, as a talisman, as a transition, or both, at open door marked by hyssop. I bless us all that in this moment of transition that we are going through as a world, as a community, right, as we transition back into bodies being together, that you all take the ritual and time of transition that you need to move from fear of body to being with other bodies in this intense moment of transition. So good Shabbos. Hope to see you in services. I'm excited